can listen and learn again. There's a piece of Torah verse at the very end of this parsha, really just the second to last verse before the one we learned about with Robin and Jean. And I'm struggling with it this week in particular. And so I want to share it with you and maybe draw out a little bit more about what it might mean for us and what it might mean, what it might be saying to us in particular this Shabbat. So right after the 10 commandments are given at the end of Exodus chapter 20, God gives a few more commandments to Moshe as a kind of postscript about the various kinds of altars that they're going to construct. Some of these altars are going to be made of stone, and some are made of earth. And in particular, when you make an altar out of stone, the Torah teaches, Lo tivne ehen gazit ki harbecha hanafta aleha va techaleleha. Do not build it of hewn stones, meaning stones that have been carved by human hands. For by wielding your tool upon them, you have profaned them. So why would it be a problem to use blocks of stone that have been carved with these tools specifically for the altar? So Rashi brings in an explanation from the Mechilta, which is a rabbinic midrash. And it says that what we're concerned about here is bringing tools of iron, clay barzel, into contact with this sacred space. So this verse is teaching us that if you lift up your iron tool above the altar, you have in some way profaned it. Because the purpose of the sanctuary, Rashi quotes, is to lengthen our days. And iron's purpose is to shorten our days. And furthermore, the altar makes peace, so that nothing that comes to cut or to destroy should be brought up to it. So weapons and worshipers, clay barzel and clay kodesh, Rashi is saying, cannot and should not coexist. This sanctuary is a place of life, and it is a place of peace. And so tools of death are antithetical to our purpose for gathering here. And I quote my friend and colleague, Rabbi Adam Kligfeld in Los Angeles, who said in a group of rabbis earlier this week that we live in a moment where we have to violate Rashi's teaching in order to protect ourselves. And I hate that this is true. I hate that this is true. We are so grateful. I am so grateful for Mark and our security team and for Jason. And I trust them 1,000% to do the right thing to both ensure our safety when we're together and to help create this warm and welcoming environment that is the core of who we are at Or Hadash. But I wish that we did not live in a world where we relied on their presence and their being armed in order to gather in community. I wish we did not live in a world where antisemitism was alive and well, and where people absorbed the myth that Jews control the world and have access to any lever of power, where any rabbi can just call up any other rabbi or the supposed chief rabbi of Central Synagogue in New York, who would then be able to negotiate a release from prison. But here we are. It is unambiguous to me that weapons brought into a sacred space with the intent to cause harm desecrate the holiness of that space. And this idea continues on in later rabbinic tradition. The Talmud brings the story of Pinchas from Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, just before he takes a spear into his hand to stab two people that were violating the law. And it says that Pinchas arose from amidst the assembly, and then he took a spear in his hand. And so since he leaves the assembly, the Eidah, where the community is gathered, and only then grabs his spear, the rabbis learn from this that one does not enter the Beit Midrash or the study hall with a weapon. And there's a late 19th century, early religious Zionist thinker that I have really been moved by, named Rav Yitzchak Yaakov Reines, who carried this idea even further. And he wrote, I learned just this week that his book is called Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir. So he wrote in Or Chadash that the calling of the Jewish people was to be the bearers of a culture based on spirituality and morality, utterly opposed to the use of force, what he called the culture of the sword. So in his words, the Beit Midrash, the study hall, was a manifest protest against wars and warriors, against instruments of destruction and weapons. The whole purpose and desire of such a house is to smash swords into pieces, to shatter spears and all other weapons into smithereens, to melt them down and use them to make pens with which scribes may write the fundamentals of Torah and wisdom and spread peace and make salvation bloom in the land. There is no greater blasphemy than to bring instruments of destruction into the house of Torah and wisdom. Rav Reines believed that in a redeemed world, violence and the culture of the sword would have no place in a Jewish space. But when it came to Jewish self-defense, he was a pragmatist. He died in 1915, but he laid the foundation for the religious Zionists that follow him to justify self-defensive military action in the land of Palestine, but with tremendous caution and restraint. This place, this shul, where we gather and we study and we sing and we pray and we love each other. Many of you know that this space is a former auto body paint shop. Tools of iron have probably been here in abundance. And these clay barzel in human hands have, over the years, repaired dented fenders and shined slick hot rods for speed and for beauty. And then, just over a decade ago, this space began to be elevated. Steel and stone and wood and cloth transformed into clay kodesh, into vessels of holiness. But it is the people who are the beating heart of this community. Sometimes when I'm here in this space by myself, surrounded by stone and the glow of the Ner Tamid, and it's quiet, sometimes I feel a little nervous to be in this space by myself. And so I'll close my eyes and I will go back to a memory of what it feels like to be here in a room filled with people, like we were on Hanukkah, like we were on the high holidays this year. And it feels like being in a shul full of people celebrating just the fact of being alive, not worried for their safety. So thank goodness for the tools of iron and the presence of officers that are here for our defense if the worst should happen. God forbid. And thank God, these are not the only tools we have. And this was demonstrated so clearly last weekend by Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker. Thank God we have the tool of being able to offer tea in a mug to a stranger. I hope we never stop doing that. I hope we never stop elevating this space into a sanctuary in the truest sense of the word, which is a space that warms and protects those who enter, while remaining vigilant and cautious to those who would cause harm. We know that strong, welcoming practices are also strong security practices. And so by going up to somebody who is familiar to you and just introducing yourself and asking them if you can help, or by pointing them out to Jason or Gail, if you don't feel comfortable approaching them, we are creating more warmth and more safety simultaneously. And we can train ourselves in the practices of what to do in the event of an emergency, knowing that just like I learned in my self-defense for women class in college, your brain may not always be able to recall the information, but your body will remember in the event that you need to rely on that. And we're in conversation about further training for security that we will talk more about and let you know about as the details come together. And finally, we can invest more deeply in building trust and relationships with our interfaith partners and with our neighbors. I shared last night that almost every day for the last year and a half, I have gone back and forth between the shul and my house. And along the way, I pass the Sunshine House there, next door. And every day I think to myself, I should really go in and say hi and introduce myself. They're our neighbors. I see the kids playing in the yard. We hear them sometimes. And every day I forget, until this week, when on Thursday, I just called them up and I spoke to their director, Kenyatta. And I said, can I just stop by tomorrow and just meet you face to face and tell you who we are and hear who y'all are and just know one another as neighbors? And so we sat together for a little while yesterday, and I learned that they have their very first Jewish student, and she, for the first time, put Hanukkah decorations up in the Sunshine House. And slowly, little by little, we know each other and we become known. So I hope that we practice these tools as much as possible so that they become part of us, and so that we each grow into a sense of ourselves as Klei Kodesh, as vessels of compassion and holiness, which gives us the power to overcome the culture of the sword.